What's up, sports fans? My name is lukasweese, host of the Weesports Chronicles podcast. We got a great guest for you today. It's Austin Karp. He's the managing editor and digital of Sports Business Journal Daily. In this episode, I chat with Austin about how he got into covering sports business and sports media, his approach as a managing editor of Sports Business Journal, as well as digging deeper into some of the viewership and ratings trends in 2020, why some of the big marquee events had lower ratings this year, and then looking ahead to the ratings of NFL events like Thanksgiving football, the Super Bowl, as well as the future of linear television, the rise of streaming services, and the future of different potential television contracts with different sports leagues. It's a really fascinating conversation with Austin, and I think for any sports journalist interested in pursuing a career in sports media, having an understanding of sports business is so vital, and I think you're going to really get a lot out of this conversation with Austin. The Weesports Chronicles podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, so make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to episode 87 with Austin Karp on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. All right, as I said off the top, I am pleased to be joined by Austin Karp. He is the managing editor and digital of Sports Business Journal and Daily. He's someone that is one of the leading voices of anything related to sports media, sports viewership, and ratings. And he's kind enough to join me today on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. Austin, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Really appreciate you having me on.
Well, Austin, we're going to dive deep into, several topics, but, many of my listeners, we have sports media figures on, broadcasters, reporters, but you're a very, unique person in the sports media industry. So why not just start off by maybe informing the listeners what your role entails on a daily basis?
Yeah. So it's twofold. One, I oversee, all of our ratings reporting. So I'm talking with the networks, talking with leagues, trying to get a feel for what's going on out there, whether it's TV ratings, streaming, other sorts of social media metrics, trying to get a holistic picture of everything that's going on from a broadcast media perspective, because it's not just the television rating anymore. There's so many ways that people are consuming media, and I'm just trying to give our readers the best look possible at a given telecast or a given sport or any sort of event like that. I also oversee all of our vertical newsletter products as the editor. So that's SBJ Media with John Oran. I'm his editor there. And we have college and esports and football and marketing and sports betting now, because that's going to be huge. And so we're really diving deep into those verticals now as part of new products that we're offering. And I'm really excited what's going on there.
Yeah, and it sounds like with the different verticals, like you just mentioned, that your readership and audience has certainly changed over the years. I mean, you just mentioned how television was so big, but now it's digital content as well as those other verticals. So I guess for you, the audience of readers has significantly changed.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at where where ESPN was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, like 100 million homes every year. Now you're talking closer to 80 million homes, and that's for a lot of these networks, not just sports networks. The amount of people in the United States that are, cable subscribers, satellite TV subscribers, that is just sliding lower and lower every year. Now, big companies like Disney, they're packaging their networks and getting on these YouTube TVs and Hulu Live TVs, so you're starting to see them actually come back up to where they were a little bit in terms of overall audience. But it's not how it was traditionally. You got to really keep an eye on the mix there between digital and your traditional cable satellite.
It's interesting because before you got to Sports Business Journal, you were an attorney and you pursued law school. So what made you decide to go from the legal world to now the sports business world?
It's funny now because, oh my gosh, that's now 14 years ago that I made the switch. And it's kind of funny because in the sports world, people I've come across, I see so many people that have that background and have made the switch because they wanted to follow something that they're passionate about. I was doing corporate law. It was a very, great, very nice firm I was with. I mean, obviously the pay for a lawyer is not too shabby. But I was like, do I want to do that? And I decided, you know what? I think I have an opportunity here to interview for the sports position. It was like just doing research for the Sports Business Daily side. And, I just took the leap. And here I am 14 years later. I still love what I do for a living. It's very nice to have the legal background. I put my lawyer hat on sometimes because, the intersection of business and law, you can't even tell sometimes. So it's nice to have that sort of analytical training and to be able to look at a problem in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, one of my former guests was John Wertheim of Sports Illustrated. He had a similar path to you, where starts out in law and then goes into sports media. And look, I mean, you see a lot of examples of that. I know Brian Burke, who's a hockey executive, then turned to TV broadcaster here in Canada, and you just see and some of those skills about analysis and problem solving, I believe certainly help you become a better journalist and a better person to understand the certain trends when you have that analytical mind that is so important in the legal field.
Yeah, and the axiom, if you love what you do, you never really work in a day. Like, I have found that to be true, and I love coming into work in the morning still.
So, Austin, can anyone do what you do? Because the thing is, like, sports media is such a unique beat. Like, covering a sports team or covering health or business. But I guess for you, like, do you think that the reason you were a little bit older, you could connect to television executives a lot easier than let's say a younger person in their 20s wanting to cover sports media?
It's interesting. Like, I was always a sports fan, first off. But when I came into this, and what I quickly learned is that, like, I'm not a sports journalist. We're in business journalism, covering that side of sports. And it was easier to wrap my head around that and treat it like a business and to look at it. And I actually found it very intellectually stimulating, like, covering the business side of sports. I find it highly interesting still. But, when I started this, I was still only 26. I was only a year out of law school. And, you're 26 is still young these days. So, yeah, I had to work. I had to really make the connections. You got to put in the work over years. And, specifically covering the media, there's a lot to learn on covering ratings. It's a gauntlet, and everyone's trying to kind of spin the story as positively as possible. That's their job. My job is to look at the numbers and be as objective as possible and give what I believe is the clearest picture of how a telecast performed, how something didn't perform, where a league is at in terms of their audience. Because these things matter, because they're signing billion-dollar contracts with these networks, and advertisers are paying top dollar. And I want people that are reading our publication to get the clearest picture possible of what is really going on.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm in journalism school right now, and one of the classes that we took was about the business of sports. And I think for younger journalists getting into the industry, having a foundational knowledge of that is so important, because look, you could become a reporter or a broadcaster one day for a television network. You're signing a contract, and the only reason why you may stay in that role is because of the viewership and the ratings, right? I know that's simple terms, but I just think that having an understanding of that, even if you don't necessarily cover it like you do, is so vital in terms of understanding just the nature of how sports and sports media works.
Yeah, and just like you said, you want to bring as much of a diversified background as you can. I was a lawyer. I also went to Georgia Tech, so I had a lot of number background and an analytical background from kind of engineering sort of side. And like I said, I was always a fan of sports, but I never thought of myself as like getting into sports journalism and covering a team on the road and being in the locker room. That wasn't something that interested me. But covering the business side of sports, I find to be fascinating, and I continue to love to this day.
So Georgia Tech, what are some of your favorite memories from sports there? It's not one of, from my understanding, not one of the big programs, but still a passionate fan base, from what I understand.
Well, we got 4 national titles in football.
Okay.
Obviously, football was big, and heck, we have a national title more recently than University of Georgia, our rival. So
right on.
Out there.
No, that's good. No, that's not.
It was football was always my big thing there. We were ranked in the top 10 there when I was like a sophomore. This quarterback named Joe Hamilton. Back when we threw the ball, then we took a break and ran the ball for 11 years. Didn't throw it forward with the option offense. But now we're throwing the ball forward again, and the forward pass is a really nice thing that they found again. I'm very excited about the Georgia Tech offense.
You mentioned earlier about when you got into sports business, building those relationships. And look, relationships are so important in sports media and sports broadcasting. I mean, anyone could have a contact number, anyone could have an email, but cultivating that relationship, how long did it take for you, Austin, to be able to say, like, look, I'm comfortable now speaking with a television executive at Network X?
Years and years, like calling over and over again. And I'm speaking, you're speaking a lot with public relations offices, and you got to pick up the phone. It's almost like sales. Even if you're in research, which is what I was doing, you have to almost treat it like sales, in that you got to be comfortable with who you're talking to. They have to trust you. You have to get the numbers right. Because if you write, we've reported stuff that wasn't. I remember my first year, I got a number from our baseball writer because I couldn't get in touch with the Fox Sports PR department. It was during the World Series, and I was like, "Are you sure this is right?" He's like, "Yeah, go, it's right." I put it, we reported it, and like 5 minutes later, I had a voice message from the head of Fox Sports Public Relations at the VP level, and here I am. I'm a junior researcher, essentially, cursing me up and down, like, this is not, oh my God, I can't believe you guys are. And so you really, they have to trust you that you're gonna be, treat the information properly and report it correctly, give it the right context. I mean, context, oh my gosh, especially now during the pandemic with all these, every property is seeing some sort of record low, or they're seeing some sort of drop. And you can't just say they're down in a vacuum and write a tweet and, okay, that's the end of it. No, there's so much more that you need to talk about in terms of shifting calendars and just the shift in the overall media landscape right now. And those are just two of dozens of possible reasons you have to consider when you're writing these things. So, I mean, yeah, it took years to be comfortable, like getting in touch with executives and having them trust you to report the numbers correctly.
Two words there stand out from your answer: context and trust. I mean, context is drilled to us journalism school students, but it's so important. I mean, whether it's, tweeting on social media, writing in articles, you can't just make a statement and just say, well, that's what it is. You got to provide, necessary historical context, current context, and background to really provide an accurate picture of what's going on. And then trust. And look, trust, doesn't happen, instantly. You got to build that over time through reps and multiple conversations, because I bet there have been instances where, you build a relationship, but then one person breaks the trust, and then boom, the relationship's over. So you really got to be able to gain that trust in order to build credibility.
I can't remember anything specific off the top of my head, but like, I know, there's been times where I've asked for something, like, and I thought it was coming, and then I had to, I had to drop it because I couldn't get the right information. And then like 5 seconds after we published, here, magically the information appears. And I know, like I said, I know people have a job to do, and those instances are few and far between. The people who work in these public relations offices at networks and leagues are some of the best people. They're really nice people, and they're hustling. I mean, they're doing so much work. So, kudos to all the people that do those sorts of jobs. But yeah, it's building trust and there's also turnover. Like some people I have worked with my full 15 years that have, they've been at either a network or a league the entire time, but there is turnover, and you got to rebuild relationships. You got to get on the phone. You have to be able to have trust with people.
So you get to, from my research, Sports Business Daily Journal as a research associate around August of 2006.
Yep.
And then, you work your way up. What's sort of the dominating trend at that time in terms of sports business, in sports media? Because clearly television's still, predominantly one of the major ways people consume content. Digital is starting to increase, but social media hasn't been entrenched into the population yet. Like I remember getting Facebook in 2008, Twitter in 2009. So that was sort of when it started to come. But what were sort of the dominating trends, themes from your early days at the Sports Business Journal?
When I started, it was kind of the shift of maybe some tent-pole sports events away from broadcast TV to cable. You're talking about when the BCS left like Fox and ABC and went over to ESPN. Like that was a major shift. Like maybe and like the Rose Bowl going to ESPN off of oh my God, like the Rose Bowl leaving broadcast TV, it's the end of the world. It's still on. I think it might still be on ABC sometimes, but those big marquee football games, Monday Night Football, when it went to ESPN, that was a big shift. I mean, Sunday they had been on Sunday Night Football, but Monday Night Football is just historically was a bigger property. And you're also seeing just the dominance of sports on TV, because when I started, you still had some television programs like entertainment shows that were, like Lost and things like that were appointment TV, and you have just seen one by one just knocked off. There's almost no appointment TV on broadcast TV anymore. So when you look at the top 100 telecasts of the year between 2006 and what it is now it's all sports.
Yep.
And like the Oscars and the Emmys and the Grammys or something like that. But it used to be like, for years, Big Bang Theory might have had 10 spots on there, or some of these other shows. But, as those shows went off the air, like sports just overtook it. And if you want to advertise your product to a mass audience, if you're a brand like Procter & Gamble, okay, you're going to have to be advertising through sports to get in front of that viewer who's not skipping through the commercials.
Yeah, and you mentioned all sports, and it's mostly all Super Bowls. I mean, the Super Bowl took like a real big, hike in terms of viewership and ratings. I believe the most rated was Super Bowl 49 was one of the most. Or
it's up there, but it's the only thing that's going to attract anywhere near 100 million viewers now.
Exactly.
And the next closest thing are the AFC and NFC Championship. You're talking in the range of 40 to 50 million viewers. You have some of these, presidential type debates or things like that, but you're not really getting brand advertising. So it's tough to really compare there. But then it's littered with NFL games, or if it's an Olympic year. And that's why the Olympics are a huge deal. That is almost like you're getting like 17 nights. That's like a full season of Sunday Night Football.
Yep.
That advertisers are getting during a 2-week. Yeah, it's 2 weeks. It's right there. But every night you're getting huge audiences, and brands want to be a part of the Olympics.
Do you remember a story or a scoop that you, or news that you broke, Austin, that in your career, signified, okay, like you becoming one of the leading voices that you are now in terms of sports ratings and sports media coverage?
Well, I mean, when I started, whenever I do these league wraps, like whether it's like the NBA season did this or the NFL season, I give a really encompassing picture. Once I started doing those, I started getting more pickup. And, when I really knew that I was going to be doing this for a living, when I knew that, okay, I maybe don't have to, maybe I can put the law books in a box in the attic, was when I saw I had written something for Sports Business Daily. It was a mid-season look at NHL ratings. I had called all the national networks, the regional sports networks, to give like a look, and it made it to print. Now, it was the first time I saw my name in print. Like, I'm not a journalist by trade. So I had never really experienced that. And it was like the first story I'd seen in the magazine, like page 7. We got it framed, and that's when I knew, like, okay, this I can do this for a living.
You speak of NHL, like, do you focus on the Canadian markets, or are you strictly United States?
In that one, it was just the U.S. markets. It's so hard.
Yeah.
Because Nielsen doesn't really measure the Canadian. Nielsen doesn't measure the Canadian market. It's a different measuring system, which stinks when, like, the Raptors made the NBA Finals. It's like every story you got to write. It's like, well, they're also missing one of the largest markets in North America because it's not measured by Nielsen. And, if the Blue Jays make the World Series, or, if 2 NHL teams from Canada ever decide to make the Cup final again, which it's going to happen eventually. Like, the odds are, it's going to happen. So whenever, if Edmonton is playing Montreal in the final, oh my gosh, I'm sure NBC is going to be on. As soon as the number come out, they're going to be calling me to give me as much context as possible. Like, oh, Edmonton's not measured. I'm like, yes, I know.
Yeah.
So we'll provide that proper context. But, that's what we're talking about, and making sure that you give the whole picture as to what is really going on.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Raptors because I know that, certainly in the States it wouldn't have been one of the, the highest rated finals, but in Canada, those broadcasts were one of the highest viewed broadcasts in sports history. So, I mean, there's the important context there. And certainly it is a shame, like, now that you mention that they just don't operate in the same metric.
Yeah, and I will like put a note at the bottom. Oh, also, like, it was the most viewed game in Canada, or this Blue Jays wild card game, did an incredible number on Sportsnet or something like that. But I try not to, do apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really try to avoid, is comparing apples and oranges. Because why? I mean, that's disingenuous a little bit. And I don't want to confuse readers. I don't want to use another I mean, everyone in the United States, all these media companies, the accepted metric is, generally Nielsen. That's when people are talking about ratings. It's a Nielsen rating. It's not a perfect system, but everyone's using the same system. Okay, so I don't want to also introduce some other company's ratings, or I'm trying to keep it on a level playing field as much as possible.
I want to pivot to talk about sports in 2020 because it's just been, such an unprecedented year in many ways, and certainly for, you in sports business coverage. I want to maybe flash back before we dig deeper into the ratings in terms of where you were on that infamous week in March when, like, everything just seemed to shut down from sports. And did you, from your, knowledge and reporting, did you sort of sense that this was going to, this storm was coming, that perhaps sports leagues were going to be postponed?
In March, first, I'll answer the first part of the question. I was in the newsroom. We were watching the NCAA tournament. I was actually in the newsroom that night before when the NBA game got canceled.
Yeah.
I had stayed late to, put a newsletter to bed, and it was like, wow, this is, it's happening. But I remember I gave a speech to like a local club here in Charlotte, and it was right after the Super Bowl.
Yep.
A week or two after the Super Bowl. And you had started seeing the news come up in Asia. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an epidemiologist.
Yeah.
But I play one on TV. And they asked me something I'm watching for, and I'm like, I think the Olympics are going to have a tough time going off. I was just focused on the Olympics. I'm like, if this spreads to 5 countries in Asia, China, and if it gets to Japan, I was just thinking Japan at the time, there's no way everybody from around the world can be coming into Japan when you have a global pandemic. Because I'm thinking back to SARS and these other viruses that we had in years past. I'm like, I just don't see the Olympics. I didn't see the Olympics happening at that time, and that was before it even hit the United States. So, but I didn't know anything else. I just knew like it's going to be real hard for them to pull off the Olympics.
And then, I mean, obviously this happens, sports get postponed, and it really then evolves into a conversation about ratings and viewership, because when they restart, obviously there's that sort of initial excitement, but then once we see the final numbers, record lows. Maybe just provide from your analysis, Austin, and I'll give you as much time as necessary, just, why is this the case? Like, why have we seen just record lows in all these marquee events?
Well, I think about it in terms of a buffet. You have all of your favorite meals put out there at the same time. You can only eat so much. Eventually, you're running out of room, and in this case, there's only so many hours in the day that you want to consume sports. That's why the sports calendar is spread out like it was. And everyone decided to come back pretty much at once.
Yeah.
In like late August, early September range. Football was starting in the United States, so you had to deal with the 10,000-pound gorilla. It was so hard to compete at a time when the NBA shouldn't be playing, when the NHL shouldn't be playing. And you had college football, and you had the U.S. Open of tennis, and they're trying to do some of these horse racing, Triple Crown races, when like the Kentucky Derby in the fall. What's going on? That's the first weekend in May. I'm trained to watch for the Kentucky Derby on the first weekend in May. And there were just only so many. And then you had the politics in the United States, because we were gearing up for a presidential election, and that was really sucking the air out of the room in terms of the ratings, because you're seeing these 30, 40, 50% spikes on these cable news networks, because was the most engaged election that I can remember. And all that combined with people just kind of want to check out a little bit. And when you watch sports and you weren't seeing a lot of these live crowds, it was just kind of made for TV sort of deal. It takes a little bit out of it. I think there's something to be said for that. And, people just want to check out and maybe just watch Netflix. And maybe that was the escape that they needed. They needed to watch Tiger King again or something like that, or some other program, whether it's Amazon, TV or whatever. But, it hurt a lot of these properties. And you saw record lows for the horse races and the NBA finals, and the NHL was down. The NHL playoffs were down something like 60% in the United States. And it was just, you got to almost write it off. Like, it's a one-off. It's going to be, you can't compare next year to this year. You couldn't really compare this year to the last year. And the people that were trying to do that on social media and trying to, get likes or try to, get some sort of one-liners out there on Twitter, it was very disingenuous without giving the proper context.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, I mean, you mentioned sort of, I guess, like viewer fatigue in the sense that like there's a lot going on and then they just want to go and watch something else. But how much would you say is sort of then the transition from more people watching on, digital platforms or streaming platforms rather than just normal linear television?
I think that was a big thing because on some of these properties, what got overlooked is that they had record streaming.
Yeah.
And streaming was up huge, but it's still such a smaller fraction of the overall audience, like single digits still. Probably low single digits, because a lot of people just haven't cut that cord yet. And we have a huge baby boomer generation, and they're still sticking with their direct TVs and their cable, because it's just easier to stick with that than have to figure out what is YouTube TV and what do I get, because with cable, you're pretty much getting everything. It's very simple. It's a good product, actually. Okay. And now you have all these different services. Oh, some of them have the regional sports networks. Some of them might not carry ESPN, and some of them might not carry this. So it could drive you crazy trying to figure out which package to get, and that prevents a lot of people from making the switch.
Do you think when these events go back to a normal time slot, I mean, even the NBA and the NHL starting a little bit later, perhaps ending a bit later, they're not going to go back to like quote unquote the June time slot for at least another year? But do you think it'll get back to sort of similar numbers, or do you see this trend continuing where, declines are more apparent in terms of television?
I'll speak specifically to the NBA here.
Okay.
The NBA was kind of in a down year. They're down 2 years almost. And this just, the pandemic did not help their numbers. They were coming off the highs of the Warriors and Steph Curry. And when Steph Curry went down, they started moving Warriors, and Clay went down too. They started moving Warriors games off of TV left and right. It was something like 7, 8, 9 games they were taking off TNT and ESPN. The NBA is kind of dependent on having big names drive the numbers. I think if you had LeBron James and the Lakers in a normal June time slot, you would have seen an uptick in the NBA Finals this year. I think there's no doubt, especially considering what you and I were just talking about earlier. There was no Toronto market to really measure last year. So the bar was lower than it would compared to those big days of the Cavaliers and the Warriors when they were going at it with LeBron. But LeBron moves the needle. He's the Tiger Woods still of NBA basketball.
And I guess the traditional big markets too, Austin, would move the needle too. Like if I don't think the New York Knicks are making the NBA Finals anytime soon, but though those traditional big markets, New York, Chicago, etc., could move the needle to more viewers.
And it really hurt the NBA, obviously, when LeBron left Cleveland, because that left a huge hole in those. Think about your ESPN nights and TNT nights. They're double headers. So what are you putting in those 7 o'clock, 7:30 Eastern time games now? It's a bunch of, there are some decent teams out there, but if you put the Raptors on, they're really good. You're not getting that market. So that's why, TNT and ESPN, it's not really worth them to put them on that often. Philadelphia, okay. Celtics, okay. Heat, okay. But there aren't those big names that are really moving it. Those were all out west. And we haven't seen Kevin Durant on the Nets yet. I think that could be very interesting to see if he can drive that sort of number, because he is the real deal. But all the big names, the Rockets, the Warriors, the Lakers, everybody else, even the Jazz and Nuggets are really fun to watch. That was one of the best series I've ever seen. that this year, that playoff series. They have to find a way to get some bigger names out east to really fill that early prime time window in those doubleheaders.
Another shift that we saw due to the pandemic was more remote production, and this obviously, is led to some layoffs. I mean, ESPN among others. I mean, I guess you're just gonna have to wait the pandemic out. But is this a trend that's going to continue in your opinion, Austin? And do you think the fact that it is remote production plays a role in declines in viewership and ratings?
I don't think it plays a part in decline in ratings. As long as you're still, they're still showing really good games. They've shown they can do it remotely. And for the first part of the question, I do think a lot of that is going to be here to stay.
Okay.
It is a bottom line thing, and these networks have lost, and leagues have lost a lot of money during this pandemic. They're going to have to make that up somehow, and if it has to be done through remote production, at some events, especially regular season games or even some playoff games, you'll still see, the full complement at huge events, your Super Bowls, your NBA Finals, all your tentpole big sport events. You'll see a big crowds at those sorts of things. But look at what NBC is already having to talk about doing for the Olympics. They normally send over 1,000 type staffers, and they're cutting that back by hundreds. They're going to be doing remote production out of the studios that they have in the United States, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Stamford, Connecticut, where NBC Sports is headquartered. They own Telemundo, so they're going to be doing some work out of that Miami office. They're going to be doing stuff out of CNBC in New Jersey. So they have these state-of-the-art facilities. They can do their remote production. They've shown the quality does not drop off on the production side. But yeah, it stinks for people. Like, that was the career of so many people, and it really sucks to see those sorts of layoffs. And I really hope I really wish the best for all of those people.
Well, absolutely. And I look at broadcasting. I mean, I've done play-by-play, and I mean, when you're in a building, you feel that energy, you feel the atmosphere, and obviously, you can see a lot better compared to watching on a screen. But it all comes down to money, Austin. Right at the end of the day, and as you said, I mean, bottom line, if it's cheaper to do, even though broadcasters may not particularly like it, if it's cheaper to do, these networks are trying anything to cost cost cut and save money.
It's a business. It's the only business with its own section of every newspaper.
One of the other things too, I mean, in 2020 with sports was obviously, more messaging related to social justice and Black Lives Matter as a result of the George Floyd protests. And there's this common point, which I'm sure you've heard, that these protests, Black Lives Matter, have led to, a decline of viewership. Personally, I call BS. What do you have to say?
Mm-hmm. Before I called BS, I really wanted to check into the numbers, and I talked to a lot of researchers at networks who are living in these numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And it is similar to what, everyone said the NFL was down in 2016 because Colin Kaepernick and others were kneeling on the sidelines. There was zero empirical evidence to really back that up. Like, there was almost no decrease dedicated to that. Flash forward to 2020. The people who are, and the numbers that I've seen in the people that were complaining about, I'm not going to watch because there are Black Lives Matters issues going on with the NBA or NASCAR did it. It has been, again, not really a factor. The people who were not going to watch those particular telecasts weren't going to watch anyways. They just wanted to get on social media, and everyone wants to say something on social media. It really hasn't been much of an impact. And in fact, I think even something like the NBA, I can't remember if it was the regular season or the playoffs, but they had actually seen a 1% uptick in Republican viewers. So the stats put those sorts of theories to bed.
Yeah, I guess another reason why we shouldn't, use social media as the explainer of everything. You got to dig deeper into the numbers.
Yeah, and that's something we try to provide. It's something we try. We're dealing with business executives who, want to know what is actually going on out there and not just read, 100 some odd characters on Twitter.
I want to sort of end this conversation by just talking a little bit about the future. And obviously, I mean, we're recording this the week of American Thanksgiving, which is a staple on the NFL calendar. The NFL playoffs are coming up. Who knows if it'll be delayed or not due to COVID, but right now, it is what it is, January, February with the Super Bowl. Do you expect similar ratings and viewership for those marquee NFL events, or do you still see a little decline like we've seen?
I expect Thursday's NFL games to be 3 of the top 10 most viewed telecasts in the United States this year. Will they be as big as they were last year? I don't know. I'm very curious to see. Thanksgiving is always unique in the United States in that the hut levels, the houses using televisions, always spikes because everyone's at home. Everyone's definitely going to be at home this Thanksgiving. They're not going to be gathering around maybe with as much family to watch those games. But the tradition of watching football on Thanksgiving in the United States is still alive and well. You wish that the Cowboys and Lions, the traditional teams that are playing there in the afternoon, were any sort of TV draw, but they are not right now. The primetime game is the one to watch for. NBC could do a really good number. They got a decent matchup there. But I think they're going to do well. The NFL has closed the gap a little bit. During the thick of the election, they were down closer to 10% early in the season. Now it's gone to 6 or 7%. They're down, maybe even less now. I think as the election noise dies down, they may even be able to close the gap if they can get some of those competitive games in some of those national windows. You start to see a playoff race pick up. You aren't having the competition you had early in the season, not just with cable news, but with the NBA, with NHL, with World Series. There's not even really a lot of college football to compete with because college football can't get on the field for a lot of these games. I think there was something like 18 games canceled in the United States last week. But the NFL seems to have a better grip on it. They have just recently really upped their protocols on the sidelines. Like everyone's got to be wearing a mask almost full time now if you're not getting back in the game. They want to get this season done. They want to get through the Super Bowl. You're not going to see – it's going to be a different Super Bowl with the halftime show, with everything, just the pomp and circumstance that normally comes with that. I'm very interested to see how the NFL pulls that off or what they're going to pull it off, to see what they do in pulling it off. They were the first to do that virtual draft. It was a record for them. So they have experience doing this sort of thing. I'm watching what the NFL is doing the rest of the season, and also with the start of college basketball, if they can get their act together and get on the court.
Yeah, for sure. And in building off the NFL, I know from your reporting that ESPN's and trying to get Sunday Night Football. I know the NHL's about to renegotiate television rights.
And they're not going to see drop-offs.
They're not going to see.
No, just because there's a pandemic, don't expect the NFL is giving any sort of discount.
Okay.
They're going to be paying, these networks are going to be paying top dollar. You're going to see a big increase for the NFL. Everyone still wants to be a part of that. All 4 of the incumbents want to be part of it, and other networks want to be in on it, whether it's DAZN wanting to get in on maybe the Sunday ticket package. That's one you're going to see change. That's not going to be exclusive to DirecTV anymore. I think you'll see the NFL really experiment there with who can carry that. It might be multiple parties, a non-exclusive thing where there's a digital partner and maybe a couple digital partners. So that may see a company like DAZN or Amazon or Yahoo. I'm just throwing out names here. Get involved there. You also may see the NFL carve out a specific package of live games for a streaming outfit. Like maybe it's the international games in London. Maybe a 5 or 6 game package goes to Amazon to just air those because, I mean, Fox or CBS was having to show those games at 9 a.m. anyways. I don't think they were really excited about it. A lot of times they try to get me to cut that number out of their season ratings anyways. So why not let Amazon experiment there? They've done a good job with their Thursday night simulcast. But getting an entire NFL package to maybe, I'll just use Fox, for example. Fox's package is not going to a digital partner. You lose millions and millions of eyeballs. And even if Amazon wanted to pay it, like I just don't see we are not at that inflection point yet in in linear TV versus digital TV.
Do you see the same thing happen with the NHL in because I know NBC's contract is expiring soon? Like, do you sense that, no discount there as well, even with the pandemic, as well as more streaming available for NHL, or is that a different animal?
I think it's different with the NHL. I think you might see some different stuff with the NHL. I don't. The live sports is still important, and the NHL is still a stronger property. But let's say they go back to ESPN, they're not going to go back to ESPN without ESPN Plus getting some sort of exclusive window of games. That's my opinion. So I think the NHL is more likely to maybe experiment with the streaming. Or maybe it's on Peacock. If they stick with NBC, maybe there's an exclusive package. And, the Canadian deal comes up at a different time. So if you're a Canadian hockey fan, I would definitely be watching what the NHL does, because it's going to be reflected in the next deal with Sportsnet or whoever, wants to get involved there. Maybe it's a DAZN up there because they have a stronger presence. But, you never know, but I would definitely be paying attention to what the U.S. writes, what happens there with the NHL.
Last question for you, Austin, and obviously, we mentioned about earlier some of, the important traits for you being successful in your job. But for many of the young journalists who are listening to this, looking to get into an industry that's, scarcer with opportunities, what advice would you give someone like that? And how important is having, even just a background knowledge of the stuff that you do in sports business?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and plug us, and read, if you can, if you're at a position to have access to us, read Sports Business Journal. Read what's going on. Check out a free trial and just see what it is that we cover. See what encompasses sports business. The media side, the sponsorship, advertising, league operations, team operations, facilities. Every day is who's doing what in the industry. It's who are the movers and shakers in our industry. But if you're young and trying to get into sports, you got to be patient right now.
Yep.
Like you said, the opportunities are not as bountiful as they used to be. And don't expect, to become a vice president overnight. You're going to have to put in the work. Okay. Everybody and their cousin wants to work in sports. Okay. So that's who you're competing against. Everybody who grew up loving sports. Oh, I want to work in sports. Okay, there's you and millions of others. So you're going to have to put in the time, put in the effort. And maybe you start off doing something I'm not saying that you don't want to do, but a different side. Maybe you wanted to do writing. Okay, but there's an opportunity with an agency doing sponsorship and marketing that it gives you exposure to the sports side. And you can see if that is something that you enjoy, if you enjoy that side of sports. Because, like I said, I didn't really know I would enjoy sports journalism. I wasn't in another side of sports, but I was in a different career. I tried getting into sports journalism, and I found something that I'm passionate about, and I love it to this day. And I wish everybody the same in their career search.
Austin Karp is the managing editor, digital of Sports Business Journal Daily. A great conversation, and hopefully, Austin, many more to come on this Weesports Chronicles podcast. Austin, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.